I just wanted to say, first of all, that I really appreciate you both being here and doing this for us. They're very strange times, and I'm super grateful for your flexibility and the fact that we can still have this discussion. So thank you. Um, I thought maybe to start, would you mind introducing yourselves and maybe just talking a little bit about uh, what you do, your bio, your background, stuff like that?
Sure. Should I go? I can go first.
Great.
Jump off. I'm Rachel Adams. I am the Chief Curator and Director of Programs at the Bemis Center. And I have been in that role since pretty much the end of 2018. So still kind of new, but been here a little bit now. And so within that role, I am senior sort of leadership in the organization. Head of the programming team. So that consists of our residency program, which is International Artist Residency Program, where we have about 35 artists per year come to Omaha to live and work for between 2 and 3 months. And then also run our exhibition program. So we do 3 rounds of exhibitions per year within our gallery spaces with both national and international artists, as well as a big sort of annual art benefit auction, which is an exhibition that we put on with, again, local, regional, national, international artists that benefits the organization and, contributes to our programming, our, operations budget for the year. Bemis has been around for 40 years, so it's quite almost 40. Next year is our anniversary, 40th birthday. And yeah, it's crazy. So we're actually gearing up towards like celebrating that for the whole year and doing some more alumni projects. So we're really starting to focus the new program on alumni and being able to give them return residencies, an award. So, basically here to like support artists in every way that we can. And yeah, continue to grow the organization through what we offer, which is always free of charge. So that's kind of our very important part.
Hello, everyone. My name is Merica Whitehall. I am the Executive Director at Fontenelle Forest. I've been on board since about June of 2016, and probably some of you are wondering why I might be on the panel. Of course, the topic is about organizations and sustainability, but I also have a long history and background in the arts as well. Back in 1995, I moved from Nebraska to Seattle, Washington to begin working as a professional dancer and musician, transitioned into being a managing director of an ensemble that toured and performed nationally at art festivals, performing arts venues, theaters, universities as well. Transitioned later on into higher education, but maintained a strong connection and work in the arts as a nonprofit management consultant, having done a lot of work across the spectrum of management for organizations like the Seattle Theater Group, Intiman Theater, Seattle Children's Theater, you name it. After leaving higher education, I moved into the environmental sector, which is where I find myself now. Previously, I was executive director at an organization in Seattle called Nature Consortium. And Nature Consortium had a 3-pronged mission of environmental sustainability and stewardship, community, and environmental education through the arts. And so through that work, as well as some of the work I did as consultant, I had the opportunity to produce interdisciplinary arts festivals. I've had the opportunity to work with festival producers, with Seattle Center, Festal Cultural Arts Series that offers a different ethnic cultural festival every weekend of the year at Seattle Center. So I work with those community leaders to help them in their professionalism and their expertise as producers of festivals. In my work as executive director at the 2 environmental organizations I've worked at, I've incorporated a strong focus on the arts. So at Nature Consortium, we taught environmental art, environmental lessons through the arts. And so I worked very closely with environmental artists and also produced a 2-day interdisciplinary art festival at Camp Long. Here at Fontenelle Forest, since my hire, we have launched a quarterly art gallery series in the Hollis and Helen Bayreuth Gallery. Last year, we were really excited to launch our very first artist in residence, and that was Barber, who had formerly been in residence with the Union for Contemporary Art. He was in residence at Neil Woods Nature Center and then produced work that was exhibited at Fontenelle Forest in Bellevue in the Bayreuth Gallery. We've also collaborated with local performing arts organizations, including the Blue Barn Theater and Opera Omaha, to host performances at our properties. So for 2 years with the Blue Barn Theater and Walk the Night, that was hosted at Neil Woods for a month-long run in October, and then on multiple occasions we've had performances by Opera Omaha here at Fontenelle Forest. So I'm excited to be invited to the panel and hope that I can make some contribution to you all.
We're excited to have you. We're really excited to have both of you. Thank you again for being here today. So, as most people probably surmised by now, the reason that we transitioned to this digital format, virtual format, as opposed to having bodies in space is because of COVID-19, the global pandemic, and we're trying to be responsible and keep our distance and stay away from each other to flatten the curve for the time being. And I thought that that opened up a lot of interesting opportunity to kind of discuss. We were originally going to talk about the relationship between institutional responsibility and carbon neutrality. And I thought that this, in light of our current situation, that opened up another opportunity to talk a little bit about public health as well. Keeping that in mind, I wanted to ask, first of all, how both of your organizations have responded to COVID-19, and whether or not there are, sort of values inherent to your organization that you enact or embody that emphasize things like public health, responsibility, social responsibility, and making sure that at an organizational level, we're all kind of doing our parts.
Yeah, well, Bemis, obviously, we closed to the public on March 13th. We were mostly actually closed already in terms of the galleries because we were installing an exhibition. So, but we, obviously all of programming has been suspended indefinitely in terms of public programs and exhibitions, gallery hours, that kind of thing. We obviously do still have our residency functioning. And the only really reason we have that is because each of our residents have their own, basically, we lost.
I think we lost
Marisa. I'll just keep going and hopefully she'll join back in. Have their own studio sort of live workspace. So if they did they were feeling ill, they could sort of social distance themselves from each other. And we actually did have some residents that left a little early from their session. But in terms of, other sort of responsibilities, our facility staff is still going in on a daily basis to keep things clean. Packages are being sprayed down, all of the sort of things that I think everybody is sort of doing, heightening their the way that they're acting out in terms of just sort of, everything is cleaner now, right? I mean, I guess that's right. A good part about this pandemic, and that doesn't just go for like our buildings. I mean, that goes for our environment as having a field day with this, I would say. The air is clearer and dolphins are back in the canals in Venice, and, all of that sort of thing is happening, which is sort of kind of an interesting, thought when it comes down to it. But so Bemis is, we're enacting that right now. We're going to be, close to the public as long as this sort of pandemic is around and the restrictions of having bodies in space is around. But still trying to provide free access to contemporary art and everything that we do. In terms of things that we had scheduled, we're postponing everything, so we're not canceling anything, but we are, paying artists to, partial honorariums for things that had to be postponed that were coming up, so that at least them, they can get some of their honorarium that was promised to them, and working to sort of renegotiate things with them once we can let people back into the building.
And there are a lot of organizations that are not doing that. I think MoMA let go of pretty much all of its freelancers and teaching artists. Whitney did the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately understandable that layoffs are happening and furloughs are happening, and we're obviously a much smaller organization, but that was something that we did work to we are cutting our budget for 2020. We're scaling back in terms of that and extending our current exhibition that we just opened that no one has seen yet, and sort of shifting things, because we are very adamant that we do not want to let go any staff members, including part-time staff members. So that's and of course still be able to pay the artists that we are working with currently, and will be working with this year. So that is that's what we're doing. Obviously, my heart goes out to everybody who's been furloughed or laid off because of this. The arts are so important to us, as we can kind of tell. Like the first week everyone's home, like all they're doing is like listening to music and doing art classes online, and looking at things that all of these nonprofits have been offering, and all of these nonprofits are we're now trying to like churn out this virtual programming, and some of us have not been of course we all have social media at this point, but it's a different type of social media now. It's a different type of engagement, than just like, oh yeah, come to our show, right? It's like, here is our show. Interact with us, ask us questions, and yeah, it's definitely been a big change, I think, and a learning curve for us, in particular, with not being able to host open studios. So doing virtual studio visits with the artists, so people could kind of see the studios, and I think growing our audience in a way, because now people from all over the world can come into the studio, as opposed to just people that are here on the day of open studios in Omaha. So it's kind of an interesting thing to start thinking about. Maybe these kinds of things might continue a little bit even after we're open again, or when we're open again. So that's exciting too.
So we're kind of reframing the situation and seeing some opportunities in what could otherwise be construed as a real big bummer.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's, my son watches Daniel Tiger a lot on PBS, and there's always like a little song or something to like, talk about the lesson for the day. And it's like, like looking on the bright side of it, right? A little bit, when Daniel smashes his cake, it still tastes delicious. It just doesn't look that good anymore.
Yeah.
So, it's like thinking about things like that. And, I would say it's kind of interesting looking at how many people are engaging with us online now, as opposed to how many people actually come to our programs, right? So, a regular maybe artist talk might only have like 50 or 60 people, but yet we're getting 1,000 views over the course of the 3 weeks it's been up. So, that's really exciting especially for our artists, because then their work is being seen by more people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see how things have kind of shifted, and it's interesting to think about whether or not the new sort of tactics that a lot of arts organizations are deploying will remain in place after this is all, after we're out of the woods. I also think it's interesting just to see the speed at which a lot of arts organizations have mobilized to address this crisis, and connecting that to, again, going back to climate and institutional responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can make the argument that climate change also poses a pretty big public health risk. There was a report I was reading earlier, a 2020 report that was published by the European Heart Journal, that said air pollution alone is responsible for 9 million deaths a year. And those are just human deaths,
Yeah,
not
not animal
human deaths
and plant. Yeah.
that's right.
No, I think that's true. I think it was Klaus Biesenbach, director of LA MoCA now, who said something like, basically every artist should be confronting climate change. Like that's the only thing that we should be talking about, which I don't honestly agree with that in particular, but I do think that, immediately, right, our quick response to this COVID-19 and how we can still like engage the public and like be, talking about things that are really important, climate change is one of those things. And I think looking forward to like what some of the lessons we're going to learn from this are, okay, well, maybe we do have to maybe like, the sort of gatherings that happen, or like the way that we work, or maybe the length of shows, or like all of these things might have to, should be changing, because then we could be sort of reducing our carbon footprint, right? We could be just sort of lessening our contribution to climate change. And yeah, sort of being able to sort of think through like how we could actually do that responsibly. And also, obviously it takes time and money to sort of figure these things out, right? Like, something that we just started doing at Bemis this year was composting, which I think is like, okay, that's not a huge thing, but it is like reducing our, the amount of trash that we're producing like all of the time, because not only do we have our 15 staff members who are, in the building 6 days a week, but we have 10 to 12 people living upstairs who are like eating all of their meals and making all of their food there. And so being able to work with Hillside Solutions to, do composting for the building and for all of our events and things like that is, something that it didn't take us that long to figure out, but, we talked about it for a little bit last year, and then we're like, let's just do it. Like we can do it, and so that's been really an exciting, like, thing and implementation for us. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing, even like more little things like that can, help our institution reduce our footprint for sure.
I think that point about mitigating footprint too, when you were talking about maybe looking at exhibition cycles or looking at the carbon footprint of shipping work, or even the production of some work, and whether or not that enters into the conversation to moving forward at kind of a structural level.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that I kind of, on the flip side of this, I'm like, man, I should have gone into art shipping, right? I like would have been rolling in the dough. If you think about how much money we spend, like every institution, no matter even if you're a small institution, on like shipping artwork across the, the state or the country or the world. So, we just opened this exhibition with Claudia Weiser from Berlin and shipped, most of her work was at her New York gallery, but we still shipped wallpaper and tiles and, her here, right, to install it. And so, and it's not that I don't want to continue to do things like that, because I do think like those exchanges are really important, and we can't, enrich our community unless we're sort of always kind of bringing in new things and new ideas and new people and new exchanges and things like that. But yeah, I think maybe the rate in which we do that, or maybe being really conscious of like, okay, we're only going to do like, a major international show like once every 2 years or something, to reduce that footprint. I had a band that I asked to come play in our, in Low End, in our music venue, and they said they're not doing any one-offs anymore. So if they happen to get a tour and they happen to be, kind of coming through the area, like they would be happy to let me know when that happens so that we can get them here. Right. But they're making, sort of taking a stand on not just flying in and out for a show anymore.
Maybe
so that's kind of an interesting, that was the first time I'd heard that, but I feel like I'm going to start hearing it a lot more.
Right. And maybe that's when partnerships become more important. If one organization is bringing an exhibiting artist or a performing artist or someone to give a talk, maybe that's when other organizations can kind of hop on the bandwagon. Other arts organizations hop on the bandwagon and make sure that that person's time is being used to its greatest benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I feel, especially, for cities like in the Midwest, like Omaha, Des Moines, Kansas City, Minneapolis, like, even to Chicago, or even to, St. Louis or something, like there could be like, there is a lot of connection points there, and even smaller cities like Ames and Iowa, like, you know, like it's just, it could work out that way, where then there is somebody that sort of, you know, an artist can do a sort of tour circuit in a way, like I'm going to, you know, open a show here, and then I'm going to go do a performance here, and then I'm going to go to a talk. And like, it's really sort of, you know, and even if that's between Omaha and Lincoln, like that's a really good way to sort of share costs, and share, you know, sort of that social responsibility of not having somebody fly out 6 times, you know, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
do things like that.
Yeah.
So I agree. Yeah. Or maybe everything just is going to be on Zoom from now on.
That too. Do you see that kind of leadership happening at organizations in Omaha already?
I mean, we definitely try to partner, you know, with our other cultural organizations and other organizations in Omaha for certain things. So, I mean, I've seen it, and I think it's happened even before I got here. You know, whether it is with like a resident being here and then being able to sort of do a workshop or do a talk, you know, with another organization. You know, I don't think that yet I've been able to really like work specifically to be like, okay, we're going to present this artist's work, and then they're also going to do, you know, we're going to split the show between 2 organizations in Omaha, or yeah, the performance is going to happen with the opera, but the exhibition is going to happen with Bemis, or, you know, something like that.
Right.
That hasn't happened yet, but I do foresee that. Like, I think that would be a really good way. And, you know, we might need to do that more after this pandemic, because obviously it's depleting a lot of people's pocketbooks. And I think funders specifically will also be looking for, you know, we're always talk about collaboration, right? Like we're going to have all these partners, but it's like, you know, sometimes those partnerships maybe are not as deep as you want them to be. And this might be a way that we can really strengthen them. You know, like I would love to do something with Fontanelle Forest, and I definitely have artists that I know are going to be coming to Bemis at some point that would also like be really interested in that. So, you know, like how can we maybe take the time now and learn through this pandemic to really like work on these partnerships a little bit more, and yeah, and that would help reduce things while also, you know, engaging larger audiences, right?
There could be another one of these silver linings to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's, and you know, it's a sunny day, right? Like let's let's look on the bright side of life.
Marisa, are you back?
I am back. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Our internet is a little glitchy here,
Yeah.
with everybody doing everything virtually right now. So
Yeah.
so sorry about that.
We were just talking about the idea of partnerships and kind of organizational leadership that's happening in Omaha, where we see examples of different organizations or institutions teaming up to, you know, bring performers or artists to town and maybe host things at multiple venues to kind of mitigate the need to bring them back multiple times, you know, sort of reduce our carbon footprint. Has Fontanelle Forest partnered with other organizations in the past in similar ways?
So I briefly in my introduction talked a little bit about the partnership that we had with the Blue Barn Theater. We had the producer of Blue Barn Theater host the event at Neil Woods, which was an incredible win-win, because of course already our organizations, even prior to COVID-19, have been really Neil Woods, which for a number of years we hadn't really provided any public programming in the facility, and that was a major ambition for me and for our team. What can we do to activate that space and to bring value to the community with the limited resources that we have? And of course, Blue Barn Theater was looking at how do they also create value for the community with their limited resources. So in essence, Fontanelle Forest developed a relationship with the Blue Barn Theater. We allowed them to use our nature center at Neil Woods for 3 months for 2 consecutive years at zero cost. We asked them simply to take good care of the facility. We invested in making sure that the facility was suitable for the uses and safe for the public to attend as well. And then in exchange, the Blue Barn Theater gave, special opportunities for Fontenelle Forest members to attend the event and that sort of thing. We had shared advertising that stretched both of our marketing dollars and also created greater visibility for both of our organizations. And so we ended up getting, great coverage in the Omaha World Herald. And although Fontenelle Forest didn't receive any financial benefit from Blue Barn Theater through kind of a formal arrangement, our donors in the community who are very, very interested in seeing collaboration and partnership and interested in organizations really being sustainable in the way they operated, really rewarded Fontenelle Forest in the form of contributed income. The other opportunity that we're working on now as far as collaboration, it's not quite firmed up yet, so I'm hesitant to mention the name of the organization that I've been in conversation with, but there is a national visual artist that Fontenelle Forest has hosted, Matika Wilbur. We hosted Matika Wilbur back in 2017. And so I know that there is another organization in the community that we're trying to time Matika's visit to Fontenelle Forest and this other organization in close proximity so that, again, we are reducing that carbon footprint. She only has to fly out once, she has speaking engagements, she has opportunity to work in the community and to exhibit at either Fontenelle Forest or this other organization. So I'm always looking for those kinds of opportunities, as a performing artist, having booking conferences and having those opportunities for presenters and for curators within regional groups to get together and really talk about what artists did you see, what performances did you see that you might really be interested in. And as presenters and venues, having discussions about what we might want to bring to our region, and then working as kind of a cohort and as a team with this specific artist to schedule what we called block booking tours for artists might be something that we can start doing across not only the performing arts, but also the visual arts.
That's great. Carol, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, I had some Zoom troubles, and UNO's tightening up their Zoom, and that's who I'm connected through on my account, and and a lot of Zoom bombing in here.
Would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do at Film Streams and UNO?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Carol RedWing. Good to meet you all. I work the membership department at Film Streams during my Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then I teach 2 classes at UNO, 2 introductory Native American Studies courses. And so I've been kind of focused a lot on shifting our current, just kind of what we're dealing with as far as the COVID stuff is going, and trying to transition and think of new ways to still deliver what I'm doing for my members, and then also deliver good content to my students still through online ways. We're hitting the point in the semester where I like to finish off the semester on a really high note. I start out somewhat going over Native history and kind of like the connection between U.S. government and the relations with different tribal peoples. And then I like to hit a high note with like art and expression and identity and stuff. And so this is a good time for that, but kind of missing out on some of the visual things, like taking them to the museum was one of mine, and so just kind of transitioning.
Yeah, the transition to virtual is a challenge. I feel like
Yeah,
it's been challenging for everybody.
I'm
But
sure and everyone is going through that too. So
I'm really glad you're here. I'm really glad that all of you are.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit about the connection between institutional responsibility, climate change, and public health, and the idea that climate change can also be viewed as a public health crisis. As it relates to the flu specifically, there's a climate scientist who works at Texas Tech. Her name's Catherine Hayo, and she posted a series of tweets the other day. I'm just going to read a couple of them because I thought they were interesting. She said, climate change is expected to increase the geographic range of infectious diseases that are carried by vectors, ticks, mosquitoes, and other animals whose geographic range is limited and expands with a warming climate. She goes on to say that in the mid-latitudes, the flu is seasonal, but as the planet warms, the flu season could end up being year-round like it is in the tropics.
Okay.
This would give viruses more time to mutate into more dangerous strains. Then there's the fact that a warmer climate may decrease immune response, which makes us more vulnerable to viruses like the flu. So essentially, climate change is a threat multiplier and takes the situation that we're dealing with now and could potentially make it a whole lot worse. So given that fact, which is probably not what a whole lot of people want to hear right now or talk about right now, do you see any places? Do you see any kind of endemic challenges to Omaha or organizations in Omaha, arts organizations specifically, that kind of keep us from moving the goalposts toward carbon neutrality, to respond to climate change as a public health crisis in the same way that we're responding to COVID-19 as a public health crisis?
Well, I mean, I think coming, for me, not being from Omaha specifically, and kind of thinking about this a little bit, for a show that I'm working on, which is now going to be in 2021 because of this. But the show is about, it's called All Together Amongst Many, Reflections on Empathy, and sort of dealing with all of these sort of hot topic issues that were leading up to the 2020 election, which now will be, reframing it a little bit. But of course, climate change was one of those things. But also just sort of locally thinking about, okay, so what can we do locally to sort of help abate this? But, what is Omaha doing? And specifically the fact that we have very terrible public transportation here, and that everybody is relying on having a vehicle to get us everywhere. There's very few, of course we now have that shared bike program and those scooters, which I think were just more of a fun thing than an actual transportation thing. But, biking is not something that many people do here. And I've lived in San Francisco and Chicago, which have great, great bike communities, and obviously also very good public transit communities where, most people, you don't have to have a car. Maybe you do, but you don't use it more than once a week or something like that to go get groceries. And so, I'm working on this project with Stacey Jones, who's from St. Paul, Minnesota, this big public meal. And part of that was okay, how are we going to get people here? Because a lot of people don't, they're going to have to take 3 buses to get down to the Old Market to have, this meal. And just sort of thinking about all of those things and how that's affecting a lot of things within the city. And obviously climate change is one of those, because everybody that's has a car is driving it. Some people are driving 3 cars out of their household, right? So how can organizations like us even, help abate that? I know this is $1 billion project, right? to implement it, to upgrade it, but I think it's a super important one. So just sort of, that's something that has been on my mind a lot lately. I don't know how others are feeling too.
I would echo what Rachel's comments are, particularly as it relates to city infrastructure. Having just recently moved back from Seattle, one of the things that I'm very, very much aware of is how difficult it is to do the right thing. You know, how difficult it is to compost if you live in an apartment building, how difficult it is to recycle your glass, how difficult it is to recycle just about anything. One of the things that just sort of made my heart sink as I am still having new realizations, having returned to Nebraska, you know, not too long ago, is that although the vast majority of waste, and this is at the individual as well as at the institutional level, although the vast majority of waste that we have is either compostable or recyclable, if we don't, at the residential and individual level, put our recycling in the small open top recycle bins, that then results in all of your paper and all of your light recyclables blowing out all over your neighborhood. And also lending to, particularly where I live in North Omaha, lending to negative stereotypes about whether or not people actually care about their community. If you don't put it in those bins, and if you do what I did, which I thought was the right thing to do, was buy a tall blue recycling bin at the grocery store, or you know, at the hardware store that has the recycling symbol on it, and it also has a lid. Well, if you do that, the waste management staff are still required to put the recycling in with the garbage, because they are not permitted to take recycling if it's not in one of those small open top green bins. I put out on probably twice a month my garbage, and all of my garbage would fit in one of those small green containers. All the rest is recycling and all the rest is compost. And so it just makes it very difficult to do the right thing. And so I think as arts organizations and as nonprofit organizations, lending our voice as advocates and also educating the community so that they can raise their voices and ask of city and state government for investment in these things, which in the long run save a lot of money and contribute to the overall health and well-being of our ecosystems and our people. At the institutional level, you know, we've become aware that the amount of carbon emission that goes into transporting all of our recycling as an organization to, I believe, Kansas City, Missouri, is equal to or more than the impact of just putting all that recycle in a landfill. That is a zero-sum game. That's not a win-win, you know, situation. And so jumping forward to climate change and thinking about, you know, pandemics and disease like the flu or like COVID-19, and thinking about the experience that people in our community are having now around the country and around the world, it's really sort of revealing the fissures in the safety nets and the preparedness that we have, not only locally, but on a global scale to really address these things. So I think that now is a time really for organizations like ours to become involved in as advocates and mobilizing our community stakeholders to become advocates for the well-being of our organizations, our operations, our community, and our world.
Absolutely. Carol, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, so I know, well, I feel like as a community organization or just being a member of the community, it's really hard to have like a strong sense of giving and taking and being a real part of it if you don't have your goals aligned with like well-being or accessibility. And I know just from like Mode Shift Omaha, I'm on the board of that organization. They advocate for a lot of individuals to be able to have safe ways to get around town, whether it's for leisure, for work, for business, what have you. But they work on the individual level, but they also work towards getting meetings set up and trying to be in the know of what's going on with city as far as it goes with planning for transportation. And really, I feel like it's no big secret that Omaha is really car centric. Just the way that we have our grid set out, just the way that we rely on that quickness and that, that old habits never die really with us. And so I also think as far as that being a really big issue in our town, I also feel like urban sprawl is a really huge issue too that that faces us for just a multitude of reasons, that goes for not just the physical spread out, and it gets harder to come into town or come into your meetings and stuff, but it's also a lot of these new businesses or these new structures or homes are being planned out on our really fertile land that we have for growing food. And once we start digging in and creating communities and new neighborhoods that are set on these really rich soils, it's going to be really bad. I mean, it's really bad. So I think that's another issue that we should be looking at as a city. And not only that, but there's also a certain amount of like segregation that comes along with that, as far as, north being defined by, these streets and these communities, and south and east and west Omaha, and then the suburbs outside of that. And so I think a lot of that's kind of disheartening, and that has a lot to do with the accessibility, our micro economies of neighborhoods that are in the area, having to do with the urban sprawl and the car transportation issues. We have a lot of work to do. So
yeah, it makes me wonder too. It makes me so when we think about things like infrastructure, when we think about things like retrofitting our buildings with more energy efficient technology, and when we think about making those moves, I think it seems like the first thing that comes up is costs, the costs that are associated with making those sorts of adjustments and figuring all of that stuff out. I wonder if, kind of circling back to what Marisa said earlier about being advocates as arts organizations for more considered kind of planning initiatives, I wonder if as advocates, if we can reframe those conversations around cost and what the actuals are to maybe what future projections are. What are future costs of not taking action? What are the future costs of not taking advantage of this moment, this very small window that's open, to make the changes that we need to and shift toward a more carbon neutral model before the most negative and severe impacts of climate change are on top of us.
Yeah, I mean, I keep kind of thinking back, or, thinking of how, sort of these collaborations we were talking about a little bit. And, is there, as advocates, as arts organization, is there a way for us to sort of all get together, these big and small within the Omaha community, to talk about these things and to advocate for, our very like supportive community to like, help us kind of like educate, but also, implement things within our own organizations, right? Like, could we apply for some like crazy, I mean, we don't know where any money is coming from anymore, but, hopefully in the future, if things sort of, tend to sort of get back to a little bit of normality, like, is there a way for us to kind of pull our resources, apply for something together, so that, you know, every organization, whether it's big or small, is doing like some sort of simple part to, yeah, reducing their footprint in some way that makes sense for them, right? If you don't host events, then obviously, you know, that's already, you know, but depending on what you actually are doing, is there a way for us all to get together to do something like that, you know? And I think what's really great about Omaha is something that Chris Cook, our director, told me right when I first was interviewing for the job. Was like, oh, you know, we have a great group of executive directors in Omaha that we get together, you know, we talk about things and we like have this group. And, you know, I was like, no other city I have lived in have I, you know, and worked in the arts, have I ever heard that before? So it's like, there's that, you know, already happening. And, you know, if there could be some sort of like trickle down, you know, Peter Hewitt funds Artstock, all of these sort of things that, you know, these are ways that maybe we could already build on like what we have to, you know, to sort of make a little bit of a stamp and, you know, make a little headway into this, you know, this crisis, because it is one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just me.
I would say that another thing that I think is important to this is organizations, and I have a bunch of kids behind me, so you might hear some voices. Let me check. They're all at a reasonable social distance, so that's good. But I think it's also really important for nonprofit organizations, arts organizations in general, to really understand what our capabilities are and what the legal parameters of our ability to act as advocates and to actively lobby. We need to understand that, because there are still too many organizations that don't understand and don't know that nonprofit organizations can legally lobby. And so, you know, making sure that that kind of education is provided to organizational leaders. But even beyond that, you know, there are so many different forms of advocacy that can take place. And one of those forms of advocacy that organizations, arts organizations, I think can play a very strong part in is public education, and really using our platforms through whatever medium we're working through, selecting our exhibits and selecting the themes of our shows, selecting the artists that we'll be working with to advance a kind of a core value and a core objective. I'm not real sure if you can still hear me.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
A core objective that, you know, as organizations rooted in the community, we'd like to see some action and some change taking place. So kind of really like a painter uses, you know, their materials, or, you know, a musician uses his or her instrument as curators and as presenters of the arts. We have that same kind of tool set in how we develop our series, how we develop the message that we want to share with our community. There's a lot of great work that's going on. Bemis has done amazing work, and I see amazing work happening that has just an incredible social voice across the community. So I would just encourage that to continue, and then also encourage organizations to really look into how do we mobilize our communities and our stakeholder groups.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of the idea of collaboration, especially with nonprofits. That's a huge topic in like public admin and nonprofit management there, in that you're not necessarily reinventing the wheel when it comes to your own organization's idea of what you know, environmental sustainability or stewardship can look like. You are it's more logical to work within the community with other orgs, as you know, as a cross faction, to have these organizational goals that kind of reflect your community, that's also reflected in another arts organization that's really shows the glue of Omaha, or what Omaha can be. And I think that just reframing the whole dialogue with everything in the way that promotes that this is what could happen, you know, if we don't take action now, is something that probably should have been happening at least a little bit, not necessarily to an alarmist extent where it's, you know, doom and everything. But I know how organizations can be running on such tight budgets as it is already, that, you know, if you're thinking, well, I'm an arts organization, my mission and my, you know, my vision isn't necessarily have to do with the environment, but really in the long run, you're costing yourself a lot more money by not getting on it sooner. I think, as we can see from kind of where we're at right now already, globally and environmentally. And I just think that it does make sense, because a lot of that cost that happens in the long run has a lot to do with climate change, and our economy is affected by that. You know, severe weather, floods, insurance policies surely will be changing in the future based on all the stuff we're going through, and places in the Midwest are seeing earthquakes now from a lot of different things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it, oh,
Better.
sorry. I was just gonna quickly say, I think, you know, exactly what you were saying, that like we might be working on these like shoestring tight budgets, but if we're able to, yeah, work things in and plan them, and, you know, like, okay, like make sort of, you know, like, okay, this year we're going to do this, and we're going to, you know, build it into that budget, and then next year we're going to be able to take this next step and change all of our light bulbs, or, you know, whatever it is, sort of like whatever we can do as organizations and institutions to like continue our programming so that it's educating our public, but also that we're also taking steps towards reducing our own footprints. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes if a company doesn't see direct results, that their initiative is, you know, financially good for them, that they might lay off or they might stop doing these efforts. But I think when it comes to planning, what would be a great idea for organizations to do is, in their fundraising efforts, to actually set apart just a tiny small amount of whatever they're bringing in to go directly towards these kind of things, because it's a community effort, it's a community issue. But
I wonder too
everyone's different.
what maybe a shared values policy across arts organizations and environmental organizations in Omaha would look like if, you know, all of us committed to decreasing our carbon footprint by, you know, 5% every year for the next 20 years, or 10% every year for the next 10 years, whatever that looks like. At least we then have some sort of measurable benchmarks or kind of goals to work toward. Were you going to add something to that, Marisa?
No. I think that Rachel and Carol wrapped it up pretty good, so I wasn't going to add anything. I think if I were to add anything, it would really just be, it's important. I think that it's important for us to understand and consider that pretty much the reason that we might not, as organizations, take sort of those more difficult or those extra steps, or incur that additional expense as it relates to reducing carbon or increasing sustainability, is because it just seems so expensive or so time consuming initially. And I think it's really important for us to understand that what we're doing is really kicking the ball down the road, because we will ultimately incur incur the expense, and it will be ultimately more expensive down the road. So really thinking about investing in reducing carbon footprint and increasing sustainability from a cost benefit or return on investment perspective, I think is really, really critical. So maybe building out those financial models as an organization to really understand that is something that we might want to do.
That's such a good point.
Yeah. I think I was saying to Peter, I think before both of you were on, that BMIS started composting this year. That was our first year doing it. And we're working with Hillside Solutions. And since we're in the old market, or, right on the edge, we have our own compost, but then we're also hosting for people in the neighborhood. Because, it's mostly apartment buildings and they don't have, a way to compost. And so if you're a member, you can drop your compost off. And it's been, I think, obviously reducing our own footprint in terms of trash, but also just being able to be that hub, and act as a hub for the community members that also are wanting to do this. And for people seeing, oh, they're doing this. Oh, maybe I should sign up. It'll be really easy now. I can just drop it as I'm on my walk with my dog, and so just kind of being able to, my husband just brought me coffee. What a wonderful man. Just being able to do little things like that, and then we get a little discount for it. So it's great. It's like, it just works. It works out, I think, in that way. So
That's really awesome, Rachel, because for the first year when I was living in an apartment downtown after moving back to Omaha, I kept all of my compost in Ziploc freezer bags in my freezer because I couldn't throw it in the garbage.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of friends that way whenever they come over and look in my refrigerator. So I eventually started bringing it and dumping it in the forest at Fontenelle for all the deers and the turkeys to eat. But
nice.
I love what you're doing. And I've also thought about the role that Fontenelle Forest could play in the community as a hub for sustainability. There are a lot of incredible organizations that don't necessarily have brick and mortar in our community that are leading really amazing efforts. And so for organizations like Fontenelle Forest or BMIS or other organizations that do have the capacity to invite smaller organizations in around a shared issue that we can all be stronger by working together on, I think that's fantastic, and I just congratulate you on the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It was a team effort. I feel very happy about it, though.
Sounds like a win-win.
Plus, staff can also bring their compost, so we all, it's good for staff members as well. It's a benefit.
Yeah, so maybe one more question before we wrap up. I want to be respectful of your all's time. I wonder how you all think that the role of arts organizations is going to change or evolve moving forward, given our current situation and what our situation might look like in another 6 months or year, 2 years or 5 years, or however far out we want to look. How do you see the role of your individual organizations kind of changing and evolving and adapting moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think for BMIS, obviously our goal is to continue to be a community leader in terms of working with artists and promoting them and supporting them and sharing their work with our community and with the world. In terms of how it's going to change, obviously everything is so up in the air at this point. I think that, we talked a little bit about, obviously now with this sort of new virtual world a little bit, thinking about even when we do return back to somewhat normalcy, does some of our programming continue to be virtual so that we can offer it to people that are, in other places and not just locally. So thinking through that, especially since our community is both obviously the Omaha community, but then our residents and our exhibiting artists who are not residents of Omaha. So thinking about that a little bit. But then also, thinking about how we can really sustain and grow these partnerships with other organizations in the region, in the area, in the region, and just as Marisa was saying, like, and maybe being a little bit of a hub for other organizations that don't have a brick and mortar or that are in between things. You know, we don't really know what's going to happen over the next few months for other organizations that are not as financially stable. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that everything will turn out okay, but and we have a really supportive community here, but you know, being aware of that, I think, is important, and knowing that maybe some of our organizations will have to step up to help out some other places that might be struggling a little bit too.
I don't really know what this all means for Fontenelle Forest. I don't know, like Rachel, because things are changing so much and so quickly, and we don't really know. This is everyone's first time doing this together. And so it's a great opportunity, it's a great challenge. But the opportunity I see is in just staying nimble as organizations and staying in a position of readiness to respond and to serve the needs of our community. I think that, you know, if I had to take a firm position, that I would be of the perspective that our organizations may not change that much because of the current pandemic and the impact that it's having on all of our operations in our community. But I think for sure the people in our community will be changed by this. Their perspective of what their lives are and their perspective of what is meaningful and important in their lives. I think a lot of people are reflecting on that. And where I see my role as executive director at an environmental organization really intersecting with the arts is when you boil down, I think, our human essence to, you know, its most fundamental core, nature and creativity and expression are the two things that are fundamental to every single human being. And so they're not really so divergent, they're not so separate, they really are important to who we are. We're natural beings, we need to be in the natural world, otherwise we experience, you know, disease and the maladies from that separation. And we also need to have voice and creativity and connection and expression and feeling and beauty and love and all of those things you find in both, you know, connection to the natural world and the arts. So I think that, and I'm hopeful that we come out on the other side of this with a society and with people within our communities that really understand, you know, the role that organizations like ours serve in the community, and that our role is elevated as opposed to marginalized, particularly when it comes to future investment by city, state, and federal government agencies.
Yeah, just a recurring theme here. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's hard to plan with something so historical for our timeline. So a lot of that does have to do with being nimble. I agree, and just being flexible. And I really would love nothing more than for us to have a normal, go back to some sort of system that's, you know, that we had kind of been doing. But I also feel like our normal has now changed and probably will change after this. Just thinking ahead. And not necessarily in a bad way. I think this is a really good time for us to really employ thinking outside of the box and coming up with ways that really do benefit our community. And going digital is an interesting way to go about that. And I think it's really essential because it also it improves our accessibility for people to come into these spaces and be able to discuss art or discuss topics. But at the same time, there's also the accessibility issue of not having an internet connection or the ability to be in a safe or quiet place to actually discuss with people verbally or written or otherwise. And so I think, at least with film streams, we've been taking it kind of week by week. I feel like almost every day, even also on top of that, so that just coming up with a new way. I know I'm still trying to offer a lot of the same initiatives or the same benefits for my members or our members of the community who use film streams as a place to get away, or they use film as a way to start a discussion, or they use the actual physical space to build community or have a meeting or grab something to eat or what have you. So I think if that component of it were not able to go back to normal, there would be a large shift and undertaking that organizations that are in the same boat would have to go through too. And I wish I had an answer for that of, what's the best way to do it. But I think as time goes on, we really just have to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, still a lot of unknowns. But I think one thing that's kind of been shared by everybody here is that this can also be reframed as a opportunity. We can see a lot of opportunities in this situation rather than seeing it as a deficit. And I feel like that's a really important thing to emphasize and a good place to wrap up this conversation. So thank you all again so much for being here and for your flexibility and for doing this in virtual space rather than physical space with bodies. We really appreciate all of you so much and all the work that you do. So thank you a ton.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Okay.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.